Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show we're talking about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Take Two, a great episode. Basically, this episode involves a painting being stolen from his auction house. It's owned by this dude named Paul, who's a friend of Sam's, and he's hired them to, try and handle this case without, letting anyone in on, the case itself, because he wants to keep this hush hush. Because it turns out this is all, the person behind all of this is this real estate dude named Marcus, played by Nicholas Lee. He's popped up in a lot of things. I think the thing I really kind of got to know him best for is just kind of a out there reach is Kyle XY. I think that's like the first thing I might have ever seen him in. I know he's popped up in a lot of other things too, but that's just kind of my go-to. Kind of a creep bag in this episode, because basically he kind of like does a lot of shady stuff so that basically he can buy things for the cheap, because he's very wealthy, but he wants to go about everything the cheap way, because this whole thing about stealing the painting is just so that he could screw over Paul, because he wants to buy the auction, and it's like Paul wouldn't sell. So now with this, he had no choice, because like his business would go under, and also he'd get it super cheap in a way. So I love that this episode kind of revolves around kind of this flirtatious nature between both Eddie and Sam. It plays a big part in the episode, because there's a whole situation. I mean, for one, you got Zuzi being brought in the middle of it, because like Sam's going on a date with Troy. Legitimately, I'm gonna go ahead and say this, I thought Troy was kind of fictitious. Like I know he turned out to be a real person, he turned out to be a really great dude, but I was just assuming he was fake, because the way Sam was just following Eddie around, I was like, oh, she's just playing, like I thought she was playing it up because he's not really a real person, like he's just in on it, or she just picked a random person. She picked the best person she could, because that's why I was actually, because I was like, oh, because she was expecting a reaction out of Eddie, but she didn't get it. But then she sees that Eddie was looking into him, so you saw that it kind of bothered her a little. But it turned, I guess the assumption is like she was trying to get him a little riled up, whether she wanted to admit it or not. And Eddie's getting all flirtatious with Melissa, which, to be fair, Melissa was flirting with both of them, because she's kind of getting on Eddie about it later on, because like during the whole thing, she's like, okay, can we get back to the questioning here when they're pretending to be FBI agents? And she's like, what was all that? He was like, I was just playing on her playing field. She was kind of acting like that, so I flirted back. It's just like, oh, you had to. It's like, you're getting on me. You're the one that kind of turned to mush the moment she started flirting with you. So it's like, I love that, because even Zeus is listening, and he's like, you do realize you were mic'd up and everything. Did you forget? She's like, oh, right, forgot about that. And then the whole thing about like, yeah, she got a little spike out of Eddie, but it wasn't just Eddie. She got the same spike when it came to you, Sam. And like, Eddie's like, see, told you it's not what you think. Because I even love it later on when he goes in by himself, because for her, the fact that she's like, no, you can't go by yourself. And I was like, oh, I thought she was going to send Melissa or something. But it turns out she was just listening in from the van. And she's like, what's going on? Because he's like, I'm going to go close the deal. He's like, not like that, Because Sam was like, oh, she's into me too. Is it? Yeah, but I'm more likely to close the deal. And just Sam listening in between the flirtatious nature between them. And she's like, I can't even listen. She takes the headphones off for a while, and then she eventually puts them back on. And Zeus is like, yeah, he's like, that sounded real. Like, I know, like, and this is coming from an actor, but she's like, I know he's supposed to be playing it up and everything, but that sounded real. And later on, when Eddie's like trying to explain, he's like, no, like, I said what I needed to say. She's like, of course. Like, I didn't believe for a second you meant anything you said. I love it. It's like, neither, like, that's what I think is so great about this episode, is the fact is that neither one of them can say what they need to say or want to say, because everyone else kind of around them knows it, like especially Zeus, because it's like, oh, for one, you looking into the guy she's dating, Troy, and then also Sam's reaction and stuff, but neither one wants to say what they need to say. And then like when she was going undercover and saying all that stuff, it came, an interesting line from Eddie came up where it's like, someone who's that good at lying, how do you ever take anything they say seriously or at face value? And he's like, that, what she said was real, just not meant for that it wasn't meant for him. Because she talked about the fact is that for her, and I thought it was kind of neat that even though she was using a fake name and stuff, she kind of talked from a real perspective of like, she was still kind of herself, talking about the fact is of like, she had a career change recently, and just like how she sobered up, and yeah, she lost some things that she probably never get back, but she kind of feels she's good where she is now. And the fact of the matter is, she's looking for someone to keep her safe, but always be there with her, to laugh with her, to cry with her, be by her side during all of this, saying everything she needs to say to get Nick, off guard. I love the whole like, no, you asking me to be vulnerable, but that jacket, it's a shield. And I love that being the excuse to get him to date the jacket also. But the thing that's what I wonder, on some level, is that what Eddie was most scared of? I mean, for one, taking those steps forward in general, but I think also the fact is that maybe on some level he thought, like she wears many masks, she wears many faces. That's just part of being an actress. So he didn't know probably where she really stood because she was very good at keeping her cards close to the vest, which is the same thing with Sam. She thought the same thing for Eddie because, like I said, anything she would do to try and get a rile out of him, and then she would pretend otherwise because she was like how it was so easy to open up to a stranger by pretending to be someone else, and he's like, pretend to be who? And she was like, Troy, because I was assuming she was going to say she was thinking Eddie. That's who she was channeling, someone who's very like kind of has his heart on his sleeves type of thing. She was channeling him like how to I guess be brave in a moment like that. She said Troy, but I think she was saying Eddie, but she just didn't want to admit that she was saying Eddie. Then they're both cleaned up nicely for the black tie event at Marcus's place to try and steal the painting. Bringing in Melissa. I was wondering about that. Side note, the actress who plays Melissa seems so familiar. I should have paid attention to the names, the actor names at the beginning, because I feel like I've seen her in something and I just can't quite place it. I won't lie, there was a part of me that was wondering, is Paul behind this? I was like, is this some kind of like insurance fraud? I mean, I don't know. For whatever reason, part of me was still thinking for some idiotic reason, like he might be behind it. I don't know why. I guess because there have been those cases so far where it's like, oh, the person you've been working with is secretly in on this and everything. So it is kind of interesting because they ended up going to the FBI. The FBI they ended up going to was a friend of Sam's, who was a consultant on Hot Suspect. This would have been an interesting time to bring back the other FBI agent, but I guess that particular FBI agent handles these type of cases. I was thinking about the FBI agent they met a couple episodes back, the one who made them forget. That agent, yeah, I thought, I mean, that could still circle back in, at some point or whatever. But for now, I was like, it makes more sense to get that FBI agent she was talking to in the episode. So I do love that this also takes steps forward with the whole Berto and Monica thing, because it's like, oh yeah, I found out that Monica's on that particular dating site, but Berto doesn't really go up there because he doesn't feel like he's not really good on paper. Like he feels like there's a lot to him, and it's just like, he feels like there's not enough to him to really like work well on paper, He's kind of downing himself a little bit because for Monica, she went up there because it kind of cuts out a lot of the middlemen, a lot of people, she kind of meets more interesting people that way and stuff like that. But then she actually wrote up a one for Berto. It's like, oh, how does this sound? And he was like, oh, this guy sounds great. She's like, that's you. He's like, whoa, how do you know all this stuff about me? It's like, when you talk, I listen. Would this be a guy you swipe right on? She's like, I don't know, put it up there and find out. But it's just like, oh, things are taking steps forward in that regard too. So I love that the whole team is happening the way it is. So I thought it was pretty nice. I did like in the end that they did kind of get the upper hand on Marcus. I didn't know what the ultimate plan was because it's like, because Paul was like, oh, we got to do this in specific order. I'm like, okay, so the painting's either back. I was thinking, or maybe Melissa painted it, but it's like, no, she's not one of those thieves. She's not, she wasn't going. I was thinking maybe that was going to end up being the case, but I was like, all right, there's two warehouses when they finally explained. It's like, while they were off checking out there, in case they found it, okay, but just in case, they had Melissa being their backup plan to go check out the other warehouse where the painting could be caught. So that smoke bastard Marcus got taken down. So everything worked out in the end. Then you had that moment at the end where Sam and Eddie, Eddie's about to go off with Melissa and Troy pulls up and they're about to walk away, but then it kind of kicked into them that they're finally like, hey, no. They feel what they feel. They walk over and they kiss each other, which is weird. Nothing happens in the episode, but it would have been interesting because it's like Melissa's like right over there. And then you have Troy literally over there, which once again is kind of interesting because we get to see a picture of Troy, but we don't ever get to see Troy. Like we just see someone pulling up in the cars. I just think that's kind of interesting, but it's kind of messed up because it's like, oh, you're kissing this person in front of that other person, But it's like, at the same time, it's like, finally, which to be fair, I mean, obviously you can't help but make the comparison because this is made by the same people behind Castle and stuff, but it's like, it took Castle and Beckett a very long time to finally get together. They didn't officially get together till like the end of season 4, like, because season 3 started taking steps that direction, especially at the end, but then like around season 4 things kind of got a little weird, but eventually they got together. It's like, oh, we're near the end of the season and they finally get together, like all the flirting, because like I brought it up like last week's episodes, like the fact is that Sam brought up the whole like, oh, him and Chris thing, and it's like, oh yeah, that stopped, and she was like, oh, like you could definitely tell they were kind of pushing those buttons to see, because like she wasn't dating anyone until this whole Troy thing popped up. So that's why I'm wondering, like, was she really into Troy? Because it seemed like more sort of that's what kind of led me to think that it wasn't real, because the whole thing, because she made such a point to kind of pop it up. Like, I think it's because she was trying to feel how Eddie felt, and by because I think much like her, like I said earlier, Eddie had a hard time reading Sam, and I think Sam had a hard time reading Eddie. But Zeus is right there in the middle, being like, "You two idiots! Like you're totally into each other. It's like, oh, this being said is totally for you. You should realize that." And it's just like, oh, what Eddie's doing right now, he doesn't mean it and all that. So that's pretty nice. It still makes you wonder, like, what are they gonna do going forward, because it's like they finally took that step forward, but it's like they're probably still going to be weird and awkward about it next episode, I'd assume. But we'd have to wait and see, because it's just kind of like, it's probably like a spur of the moment, just like, this is how we're feeling, act upon it, stop fighting it. And now it's just kind of like, okay, so where do we go from here, because it's going to be weird and awkward. Next week's episode is, in fact, the season finale, which I'm very interested to see what that case is about. I kind of get an inkling. I haven't seen any previews, so this is just based on my assumptions and stuff. I'd assume this has something that might have something to do with Deacon, just because he hasn't circled back in a couple episodes, so I feel like that'd be kind of like the perfect case to kind of end it all. But this is probably also around the end of the probation period for Sam, so it's like, oh, where do we go from here? Does she want to continue being a PI? Because that hasn't circled back in the story, so because it was like, wasn't it for like 6 months she was on probation, or was it like 4? But I kind of get the feeling like I always had a feeling like that's where it's going to end into the season. So that might be the storyline we see next episode. So it's probably going to be her deciding, like, does she want to continue acting? Does she want to continue working with Eddie? And it's like, if she goes back to that acting world, will there be even her and Eddie? Because, because for her, she had talked about she didn't want to give up acting before, but then she also talked about the fact that she didn't want to go back to being the person that she was before. In the whole episode, all about Ava, she had talked about she didn't want to take those steps back because she likes who she is now, not the person she was then, because she's grown and changed. So it's like, maybe acting isn't really where her passion lies anymore. I mean, because that's something we've seen it referenced, and it's come up a little bit, like her acting within the show, obviously because it plays a part in like their investigations. But like, I mean, there's that one commercial she shot, so maybe that'd be something we see the entire final episode of the season talk about, or maybe that'd be something at the very tail end of the season of her like having that choice of like, where do we go from here? Where does her and Eddie stand in that whole situation? Maybe also get to see what happens with Berto and Monica, where anything grows from that. Like, there's a lot to wonder about going into the season finale. I'm very excited to see what goes down. Like I said, overall, this was like a great episode, a lot of fun, and just like legitimately, like, Sam and Eddie have easily become one of my favorite duos, just because of like the way they work so well together, and just, especially this episode with the whole flirtatious nature, because it's one of those things I always talk about I love in TV shows. It can be irritating for some people. It happens a lot. It definitely happens a lot in like manga and anime, but I think that's kind of like a Japanese culture thing, just kind of like how romance, at least how it's portrayed. Obviously, like, manga and anime are very like exaggerated, much like TV shows. Like here in the States is like a very exaggerated, like, love lives probably don't necessarily work like that. I'm sure there's someone who does, where it's just kind of like this back and forth, but neither one's really willing to take the step forward. It comes down to the people and stuff like that. But I always like that in the show, because it's like, finally, once again, I bring it up, it's a lot quicker than Beckett and Gasper. It took forever after the constant back and forth. There wasn't a lot of like, dating other people or anything. Like, this episode was the only episode to really bring that up. So I thought that was kind of a pretty neat element. Perfect timing too, just to kind of finally facilitate them kind of coming together. Especially, it makes it perfect considering, like, capping it off with the season finale. So like I said, we'll have to wait till next week to see what goes down in the season finale, how they end up wrapping up the season. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good